So thank you guys so much for joining us. I can't wait to get into the discussion, so I'm going to jump right in. And Eve, we're going to start with you. If you could share your research on women shouldering the brunt of child rearing and the domestic life responsibilities, regardless of whether women work inside or out the home, what have you found? What's going on in that space?
Well, after 8 years of research, what I found was that a lot of the problems in the home present very small. So I had a man actually in White Plains, New York, Rob, near you, tell me that he was locked out of his house over a glue stick, and he was deciding whether or not he was going to go stay in New York City. This is before the pandemic, or whether his partner, his wife, was going to actually let him in. I started Fair Play over my curiosity for why my husband kept sending me texts like, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries," where I was the default fulfiller of his smoothie needs. I have another woman in COVID telling me that she's thinking of getting a divorce because her wife keeps stepping in the spaghetti of their toddler. So these things they're presenting very small. But the chief finding of Fair Play, sort of what's underneath it all, after 8 years of research, was this idea that we treat men's time, and pardon me, Rob, because you're an ally and part of the solution. But this is a societal issue where we treat men's time as finite, like diamonds, and we actually value and treat women's time as infinite, like sand. And that those discrepancies we know from the workplace, because women aren't paid the same for the same job in the workplace. If women enter male fields, the salary goes down. But what I wasn't prepared for was how much that what I call the sort of toxic time messages we give ourselves we're falling on women, where women in relationships regarding men's time with things like, "I'm a better multitasker. My husband's better at focusing on one task at a time. I have better executive function." Not true. Other women saying to me, "In the time it takes me to tell him what to do in hetero cisgender relationships, I might as well do it myself." Again, not true. Even women and men in the same career, 2 colorectal surgeons, 2 shipping supervisors. Still, I heard over and over again women saying, "I'm better, I can find the time, and my husband's better at focusing on one task at a time." And so what I like to say is, unless we're Albert Einstein and we can mess with the space-time continuum, which I really wish we could do right now to gain more space and time, there's actually no way to find time. There's just a very different expectation over how women are supposed to use our time. And if, God forbid, we're not parenting, or God forbid, we're not working, we better not be using any of that time for ourselves. And we know that from the data that men do take twice as much leisure time as women, and they are better at taking that. I had one couple where an amazing man said to me, "I'm a plate. When my plate's full, I don't take on any of the unpaid labor in the home." And then his wife said to me, "Well, I'm a conveyor belt. The only way you can be a plate is because I'm a conveyor belt and I'm taking everything else that it comes at us." So this is really about, I look at how do you treat your home as your most important organization with some respect and rigor, so that we're not making these micro decisions and dying in decision fatigue, or deciding who's setting the table when we're hangry and cranky. But customizing your defaults is the way, in my mind, and what people are seeing in Fair Play as a way to avoid the she-fault.
No, Eve, I think you've hit on so many great points, and we've linked within, for both Jen and Eve, in the chat right now, you'll see links to both of their books, and I encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunity yet, to read them, because these discussions are so important. And switching gears a little bit, Jennifer, managing dual careers can be exceptionally tricky. And focusing on the questions of power, identity, and support, how can couples engage in these questions in their relationships today? What steps can they take?
Well, first of all, it's really important we do. I think a lot of the time, as Eve said, we focus on the tiny things, right? We focus on these little day-to-day things, but that's not really the issue. The glue stick is not the issue, right? The issue often comes down to power. Who holds the power in the relationship and why? And I really look at power over the long term in my book and the different stages of our career. And when I talk about power, I mean who gets supported to go after their dreams and ambitions. Now, that might be career ambitions. It might also be just personal stuff we really want to do. And what I find is that early on in a relationship, that tends to be fairly balanced. But over time, that tips. And it's not always in favor of the man. It sometimes is, but not always. But often these little decisions we take start tipping this balance to the point where the couple gets set up such that one person is supported to go for their dreams and the other person is the supporting act. Now, that may show out practically. It might also show out emotionally, right? Who's carrying that emotional labor for the family? It might show out in terms of career choices. Who gets to make the career transitions they really want to do? And who needs to stay in that stable job to fund those career transitions? So it shows out in all sorts of ways. And what I find is the path to hell for dual career couples is this imbalance of power. Now, sometimes when we think about power, we think, oh God, that's very scary. I don't want to talk about that in my couple. But it really comes down to two things. And now is such a great time to talk about them, because in this period, although we have a lot on, a lot of us are starting to reflect on, what do I really want? What is all this for? When we have these existential issues of health and death around, it really focuses our mind on, why am I doing this? And the two things couples should be talking about right now is, what really matters to us? What do we want to get out of our lives? What does a good life mean for us individually and as a couple? And are we really supporting each other to get those things? Or is that support uneven? And if we can crack those two questions, we can actually, in dual career couples, handle a huge amount of action, two huge roles and kids and everything else. It's really about, can we fix those power dynamics? So that's what my research is very much looking at. So it's very complementary to Eve's work. So it's lovely to be on the panel with it.
Yeah, it's a powerhouse panel. We're so excited. And so, Rob, as a husband and father and a dual career couple, tell us what has worked for your family to navigate this moment and what Unilever is doing to support other working families.
Oh, so first, let me start by thanking you for having me on the panel. I feel privileged to be with both Eve and Jen. It's great to hear and see and read their content. So let me start with my family, I think, and then I'll get to Unilever and work. I think the context for me is important. I grew up with a working mom. So I think that initially set the stage and context for me, when mom's working with the exception, not the rule, back in the 70s and 80s. And I think that helped me kind of like see the lens for which I view a household. My wife works and she has always worked. And I think that's, again, an important dynamic that I just growing up with and kind of moving into my relationship and my marriage with, I think has given me a different perspective. And certainly a different dynamic as I think back to being a child and the dynamics in a house where your mom worked and none of your friends' moms worked. It's just very different to see the interactions. And that's frankly all I knew. That was like how I grew up. And I think for me, I've been fortunate in situation with my wife to have that kind of partnership. What's interesting is I have two teenage boys. So we're hearing a lot about kind of the homeschooling and like kind of daycare needs. And for us, it's a very different dynamic. Our house pre-COVID was in perpetual motion between school activities and sports. My wife and I both have very active lives outside of our home. I still play ice hockey. I play tennis. My wife has a full slate of activities as well. And it's almost like COVID has brought our whole family dynamic to a screeching halt, and which has been interesting. And I think it's kind of evolved the dynamics of our house, because the external community that we relied on to help us and also just for access for ourselves and our children has also totally changed. So nearly every night we sit down and have dinner as a family, which is just something that we frankly did not do pre-COVID, rarely as a family. And I think everyone's kind of digging in to this kind of new dynamic. And, I've taken on a host of new roles. I'm a bit of a stylist now. I should cut my own hair, which looks okay now, but it looked much easier on TV. And this is about 6 weeks ago. So you can only imagine what it looked like then. And then I've also helped my wife. I helped her color her hair, which actually was a lot easier than I anticipated. But I sat in the bathroom, I had the gloves on, and we were kind of working it together, and she looks great, I think. And then we certainly have had our kids much more engaged, sweeping, mopping duty, those types of activities. So I think that's been great. And then I think from a work perspective, I think a couple of things. Unilever is a global company, so we took the pandemic seriously early on, just based on what was going on in China and Italy and how it's made its way. We closed our office-based employees, sent everyone home in the first half of March. I mean, there's never been a better time, I think, to work at a company like Unilever, who's purpose-led and people first. And we have a number of brands doing a number of things to support what's going on. Our probably biggest foray is we just launched a program called United for America, helping providing essential products like soap and food and disinfectants to those in need through Direct Relief and other organizations like Feeding America. And I think that from a personal perspective at work, or from my own perspective at work, early on, we sat with the team with a lot of young mothers, and we said, look, let's talk about the schedule. Let's talk about what works, nap schedules, homeschool schedules, and we set kind of a course. And actually, only a couple days ago, I got some feedback that while that was well intended and it was working for a period of time, it was not enough. So we actually sat down as a group and we actually changed what we were doing to give more space and more time, because this idea of balance of work life, I think, is totally blurred. And it's very difficult, I think, on a number of moms and dads with young children.
Absolutely. And I fully commend what Unilever is doing, because just having those conversations, a lot of companies still aren't willing to address kind of what's going on with either parents not having childcare or trying to balance childcare and working. So that's a wonderful kind of approach that you guys are taking. And so we know that we've seen this dramatic shift with kind of this melee now of everything coming together. And on the individual level, what conversations do we need to incur within families? What tactics on how we can approach finding a balance of these competing interests? Rob, you touched on some of them a little bit with, companies being forward thinking and that, but how do we empower individuals both in their relationship and, individually to kind of figure out what they need to do to reconcile with these forces? And I'll open it up to Eve or Jen.
I'll just say quickly that what Rob is doing is actually very, very innovative. And that's just admitting that he's communicating about these things with his partner. A very strange thing happened in my interviews, and I did over 500 of them that mirrored the US Census. I had so many women and men tell me that they don't communicate about domestic life because it's too triggering. And that was so strange to me as a mediator. So I would sort of dig into that. Well, what do you mean you don't communicate about domestic life? So one woman said that to me, and then unironically, 20 minutes later, I'm writing down dumps wet clothes on husband's pillow when forgets to put them in the dryer. Another woman said she doesn't communicate about domestic life, and I find out she has an Instagram account called The Shit My Husband Doesn't Pick Up, and she publicly shames him on Instagram. I've been reaching out to all women and men who are in these COVID groups called The Reasons I Hate My Partner, and are publicly threatening that if COVID-19 doesn't kill them, they will. But then in the DM, they say they don't communicate about domestic life. So I think the number one thing I would say is recognize, I say this as a mediator to the families I work with, recognize that you are already communicating. So this is not about a communication start. This is about a communication shift. So do you want to communicate by threatening murder of your partner in a public forum? Or do you want to do what Rob did, which is actually have an honest conversation about things that are working or not working? So my advice is communication like a practice, the same way you would treat meditation or you would treat exercise. I wish I could run once and be fit forever. That's not how things work, but that's how often we're treating our home communication. So the practice of communication means finding a time when emotion is low and cognition is high. And so that's what Seth and I do. We sit down, and a lot of fair players do this because it's part of the book. We sit in every night for a check-in. We set a timer for 10 minutes. And we check in about how that day went and what's happening the next day. We oftentimes start, as Jennifer said, why. So instead of launching into you didn't do this or you didn't do that, we just start with our why. How are we doing together, supporting each other as a couple, as parents? What's going on? What's the sticking points? That practice of communication, people are investing more in toilet paper right now than they are in communication. So start a practice when emotion is low and cognition is high. It really, really does pay off.
Those are, I think, great tips. And cringe a little bit when I think about how much toilet paper I have and if I'm protecting my toilet paper more than my relationship. But Jen, what else can we do on the individual levels from what
I think that's great advice. What I'm finding right now is the biggest mistake couples are making is trying to replicate business as usual. How can I do all the things I used to do when I had the childcare support and the school and everything else, and replicating that now? And first of all, that's impossible. And secondly, it doesn't make sense because the world has fundamentally shifted. And I actually think the most important conversation we need to be having in our families right now, whether that's in our couples or like Rob, or like my children are a bit older too, where our children are a bit older with our children, is what are the things we're feeling anxious about? What are the things we're worried about? Because when we're feeling anxious and worried, it impacts our decision making, it impacts how we treat each other, it impacts how we communicate. And I think starting at that level is really important for a couple of reasons. One is you probably don't know what your partner is worried about. And I bet you don't know what your kids are worried about. And that is where we really need to start. Okay, how do I relate to this person? How do I meet their practical needs and their emotional needs? And I can only know that if I know what's on our mind. Secondly, if we understand what each other's concerned about, we can look to mitigate that, right, in some ways. So some of our concerns are obviously big existential. I was like, will I get the virus? Will someone close to me, will someone close to us become seriously ill, right? There is actually stuff we can do about that. Other things are careers like job uncertainty, all this stuff. I think the most important conversation is to lay this out and then think, okay, given these concerns, this new normal, how do we need to structure our routines? What are our boundaries? What practicalities do we need to focus on? And what do we just need to say right now? That really doesn't matter. And I think we've got to start at that fundamental level, because trying to recreate what we were doing 3 months ago is just going to send us all into nervous breakdown territory, which is not helpful for anyone.
Yeah, I love the communication conversation. And I think we're living through that, I think, what is a heartbreaking and painful time on so many levels, not just the pandemic, but obviously recent events across Minneapolis, Georgia, and New York. And I think with teenage boys, it's a really nice opportunity, especially when you have family dinners, to have teachable moments and talk about these real issues and get their perspective, their kind of hopes and dreams and frankly fears. And I think, I've been fortunate. There's a neighbor in my town, a woman named Lori Wolk, and she writes a parenting column, and she's actually been writing about parenting in a pandemic. And there's my son coming to get his geometry homework right in the background there. So this is live. This is really what it's like here. And so she's been writing these columns about parenting in a pandemic, and actually she's focused on teenagers. And I think it's been great to get outside external guidance on how to think about parenting and communication, to what Eve and Jen were saying.
Absolutely. And I think because we've got a lot of great questions kind of flowing in from the audience, I'm going to ask kind of the team one more kind of combined question, because we talked about the individuals, what we can do kind of within our home and our individual couples. But for companies and for brands specifically, how can we change the rhetoric with balancing work and home? And we've touched on this a little bit. We've seen some discussions, but what else can we be doing? Or how, you guys are all in great positions of power yourselves. What can we encourage companies and brands to do to support couples that are dual career?
I'll start just quickly with the things I'm looking at, because while Fair Play is about taking agency in your own home, and the power of being a game changer, to say that, as Jennifer just said, right, that if I don't have the power, or I don't feel like I have the power, that I can be a game changer in my marriage. Too many women said the way they got power back was to divorce. So I said, could Fair Play just be divorce for married people? Because I want people to stay together. Because I came out of a household of divorce, and being part of a single mom household was not easy. But I think in terms of the bigger policies, I like to call them Fair Play, which is righting the gender imbalance in the home, right? Women are doing $10.9 trillion of unpaid labor a year across the world. That's unsustainable to build a society on the backs of unpaid labor of women. So that's Fair Play, but also fair pay. If you really truly believe as a company that women's time is equal to men's time, that all of our time is diamonds, you will pay women the same as men. So examining your pay equity policies. So fair pay, fair play, fair pay, and then I say fair day. And the last one, of fair day, is recognizing as a company that work from home is not the same as flexible work. And I think too many companies now are conflating work from home and flexible work. If you have to be at your butt in a chair for 9 hours a day, whether it's on Zoom or in the office, that's not flexible work. And the number one thing parents want in survey after survey after survey after survey that I've read, some of them dry as hell, but I still got through them for fair play, was they want flexible work.
That's great. And I think, Rob, I'm going to be, Jen, before I go to you, Rob, I'm going to kind of ask you, because you've managed such great campaigns with, the Dove and Dove Men Care, as well as the other ones, for brands, what can they do to better support equality? What are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, so I think Dove Men Care Plus Care is, I think, a terrific example. We launched it 10 years ago. I remember when we launched that campaign, the brand was we launched it differently versus most men's brands, I think, focused on performance on the field. And I think what Dove Men did, which was so different, was we focus on performance off the field, as a father, as a son, as a husband. I think that was like our mission 10 years ago, and we've continued to take that through to today, about when we talk about performance. And so one of the things that we've been really active and involved with is a comprehensive leave act, and specifically paternity leave. And that's, I think, the best way a male brand could focus is helping drive paternity leave, because it's very simple. I mean, having a father at home in the beginning, to a large degree, it offers enormous flexibility to the mom and the wife if they're in a career as well, to give them flexibility. And by the way, it also, I think, sets a tone early on in a relationship. I think what both Eve and Jen talked about is setting a precedent early on that there's a responsibility for the father in the child rearing experience. And so that's, I think, what we've done as a brand. And I think brands actually play a very important role. I mean, it's $1 billion industry of communicating to consumers across every platform. And I think what we say matters as an influence. And I think we're hoping with Dove Men Plus Care that we can press on around this idea of paternity, because it's a win for everybody involved. And it's not a political issue. It's I guess it is, but it's one I think everyone can get behind because of what it does for the family.
Great points. And Jen, couples brands, what have you seen in your work, and what else do you think we can do?
So my big hope from this crisis is that it destigmatizes home working. So we know now in almost every company that we survey, when people work from home, they're passed over for promotions, they don't get the pay rises, and they're seen as being on the mummy track, whether they're a guy or a woman, right? They're seen as just not that committed. But now everyone, including the CEO, has had the experience from home working. And I agree with Eve, if your kids are around, it's not flexible working. So when we look at the research, we see that in normal conditions, which we will be in again in 3, 4, 5 months time, we are again where I am now in France, thank goodness, that actually it's much more productive and it's better for our mental health. So when we can work from home at least 2 days a week, that tends to be a sweet spot, that we have the flexibility to do other things, but we still get the face time and that personal contact in the office. This is where the magic happens. And my real hope is that it will destigmatize this, and this will become the norm. Home working for a portion of the week will become the norm. And this will help working couples enormously. One of the biggest pinches I found in my research was the fact that we both have to be out of the home all the time, on the road, traveling, the commuting time. All of this is a huge drag for dual career couples. And if each partner can take 1, 2, 3 days of work a week working from home, it's not flexible work, but someone's there when the refrigerator gets delivered or for the TV repairman. I mean, these stuff needs to get done. And when both partners, men and women, can do that, it really unlocks things for working couples. So that is my ray of light, I hope, comes out from this awful situation.
And I think awesome. I think agreed. If we could see that change, it's going to be, I think, really kind of start to see things that we've been watching, the trends before COVID, really put them further ahead. So I'm going to kind of shift a little bit now and to the audience. If you have additional questions, put them in the chat, and the Mother Honestly team will help bring them over. But one of the thoughts was, how do you address during this time when parents are expected to work without childcare? So we've seen kind of both parents that have childcare solutions and where they have them in the house, Anything out recommended where they aren't going to have the kids in school and they don't have a job that allows them to perform without childcare, if they don't have the flexibility to be home.
Yeah, I mean, I have some practical points here. Sorry, there's some echo on the line. The first is, don't take homeschooling too seriously. You cannot be your kid's teacher and their parent. Even if you are actually a teacher, your role cannot be their teacher. And unless your kids are approaching a real key exam stage, the SATs or something, it doesn't matter if all they do for 4 months is read books. They are going to be fine. So I think we need to take pressure off our shoulders, firstly. I think secondly, the most important thing for working parents is boundaries, really sitting down and negotiating. What are those periods in the day where I know I can close that door, get on with my work without worrying about someone knocking on the door and coming in for help with algebra homework or whatever it is? Because it turns out that if we know we only have 3 hours of time, we can actually get an enormous amount done. Because normally when we sit in front of the screen for 7 hours, we just check Facebook and we do something else and then we call someone. And actually, if we know we have 3 hours, you can get probably 5-6 hours work done. So it's all around negotiating what is the space I can work in that's protected, and when are those pockets of time, and just letting go of that role of homeschooling and worrying too much about the kids. And you can actually, most of us, get a normal job done. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to probably be good enough. And that's all we can hope for right now.
Yeah, I would just add to, I think also from a work perspective, it's great to have employers. And we joke in our team meetings, like, kids are always welcome and the kitchen's always open. So that, it's great to have the kid. I think that's also just part of the environment when people do not have that external community to help. And I think it's important that employers, I think, adapt some of these principles. I've seen many of my colleagues cook their grilled cheese for their kids or pasta, and just it becomes part of the meeting. I think that's important for employers to adapt to some of these kind of new realities that we're facing.
And Rob, we had a really great question come in that I'm going to have you kind of field from the male perspective. Then Eve, Jennifer, please weigh in. How can dads and men chat with their companies about parental leave? What do you recommend?
So I think it starts with the HR community and senior leadership. And I think providing a perspective, and there's so much research, which is how we rooted all of our paternity leave focus on, to just go and very simply talk about the benefits for both the father and the mother, both your female workforce and your male workforce. So I think it starts with at the top with your senior HR and senior leaders.
Eve, Jen, anything?
I will say modeling matters. I was talking to a man, we're doing a documentary on care right now, which Rob and Jennifer, I'll follow up with you on. But we're through Hello Sunshine, Reese Witherspoon's media company. And part of what we're looking at is we're interviewing couples. We've interviewed about 75 in the past 3 weeks. The ones that are really doing well, they are correlated with men who've taken paternity leave in the past. There was a man I spoke with whose boss had just taken 5 months of paternity leave. And it was a beautiful conversation because he said he felt like his team really needed him during COVID when everything went crazy in March. And he had this big pull, like, do I cut my paternity leave short or do I take it? And it was his senior leadership that said, you know what, your job is here. Like, we want you to take your paternity leave, even in a global pandemic. So I think what Rob is saying is so true, that it really is about modeling. It's not just about someone saying, you can take this, we have this policy for you, but you want to be able to see your senior leadership take their paternity leave. Because this man I spoke to, he was modeled by his direct manager who took his, and then the direct manager above him who had taken his. And that's really the chain you want to start seeing. It's, as Jennifer said, we just want to normalize things, whether it's working from home or taking leave. Like, once you normalize things, then it can become the default. We want to customize our defaults to the better side, where an ideal worker is not someone who sits in a chair for 10 hours a day.
It's interesting. I think it was 2018. I forget the exact date of the stats. We had more men take paternity leave at Unilever than women that took maternity leave. So Eve's right on with the modeling. I think that's really where such an important part. It was funny because I had my kids many years ago, and I was at Unilever at the time, and we didn't have a paternity leave policy. But just I think it speaks to the culture of the organization. I took the time off that I felt was appropriate, and it wasn't like an issue. We had a maternity leave policy, but we did not have a paternity. But it's just the culture of the company. It's almost like our protocols caught up with what we were operating as an organization. I think that's just so important from a modeling perspective, as you said.
And look at your organization. They came up with the Dove Men Care campaign, which I think is the best campaign, for men out there. So, but I think it's a circle. You also have a corporation that allowed you to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jen, I'm going to turn to you on this one. How can we help encourage workforces to get their employees to actually use COVID-specific family leave that was enacted in the US, or what we've seen? You have a great global perspective right now of what's going on in Europe. What do you think on this topic of encouraging people to take the leave without repercussion?
Yeah, so obviously the reason people don't take it is they're frightened, right? If I take that, am I going to be punished later? And that is a big issue, particularly in places like the US, where we know from the research, these things happen, right, with other things. We know in the US, men do tend to be punished when they take paternity leave in many companies. And so it's got to come, as Eve said, through role modeling from the top. It's got to come. People only take care of these policies when they see people more senior than them do it. So I've been working with an Australian company called Mirvac, who are a construction company, right? Real manly men. And the CEO really wanted to change the culture. And what she decided to do was ask the men at the top to change the way they worked and tell people about it, right? So to finish early a couple of days a week and go and pick their kids up, or to spend some time in the middle of the day to go to the gym. And her only ask is you do it and you tell everyone you're doing it. And lo and behold, 6 months later, everybody in the company was doing it. And I'm afraid these changes tend to be better if it's the men who are doing them, and it's the senior men who are doing them. So if anyone listening has influence or is one of those senior men, these are the guys, it's the Robs of this world who need to lead the way here. It's very difficult for people lower level in the organization, and quite frankly, women, to do this because it will be discounted. So it's got to start with the top.
Eve, Rob, anything on your thoughts on encouraging people to take the leave, or having kind of those, even if it's having another child, or people are concerned about their career sometimes when we make these big life decisions? How do we normalize this for career power couples?
I think, again, besides modeling, something you could all do, you can ask your partner right now, your colleagues, if they are men, to do very small things. Sometimes modeling is very small. It's calling your school and saying, please put my husband right on as the number one call when my child's sick. And so I asked a lot of men in Davos when I was there to do that. I said, if you're in this room, the one thing you could do tomorrow, obviously when we go back to school, it's a little different right now, but call your school, be the first person that you call, because the more we see men interrupted during their workday from calls from the school or pediatrician, the better it's going to be. But I agree with Jennifer. It's hard to be on the forefront now and take some of these policies. I have a lot of people who are afraid. I had one man said that he can't take the policy, so instead his wife quit her job. So let's just be honest that there is there's a risk that we're going to see some regression in women's participation in the workforce. So we all need to be on this as cultural warriors. Everybody who's tuned in today is, and I love my panel because we'll just keep fighting for a lack of regression and the normalization of care.
Rob, any thoughts? And one of the things I loved about reading kind of the public chat going by is everyone really appreciated your perspective, but also your son coming in to get his homework, because it normalizes that even though everyone's sitting here on these panels from all across, we've got Eve, thank you for getting up early on the West Coast. You're in New York, and Jennifer, you're in France, is that everyone's trying to make this work. So I appreciate the candidness of this panel. But any kind of, I'm going to just kind of open it up on, the last kind of parting thoughts before we finish the panel on what you'd like to see coming out for dual career couples. And so we'll start with Rob. Final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think I really appreciated all the perspective, even Jennifer. I think the communication I think is so important, and it's a journey. I think I myself. I think if you were to ask my wife kind of the responsibilities in our house, she'd probably say 60-40 her. I'd probably say 55-45, but we're in a spitting distance. It's like statistically insignificant, I guess. But I think part of it's communication and just again, Eve talked about her fair play, and my wife is a big voracious reader of the book and plays the cards and with me. So I think it comes down to communication.
Eve, I'm going to turn it over to you next.
I think my final thoughts are back to what does our future look like? I think my dream for society is that, and this is one of the questions I asked, especially professional white men. Actually, men of color were a little different in their responses, but especially professional white men. I asked this question: do you believe holding your child's hand at the pediatrician's office is just as valuable to society as an hour in the boardroom? And it was hard for a lot of men to say yes, that they really truly believe that. So I'm hoping that that's what a global pandemic does, that we recognize the value of care. And I always love this. One fair play couple sent me this, that her dad sent to her, and it says, "I love you so much because you take care of me and Sam. And when we go to the doctor, you hold our hands. I love you so much more than you know." Like, to me, this is why we're on this earth, to raise good human beings, to model good behaviors, to be part of a community. And so that's what I'm hoping comes out of this.
Thank you. And Jen, final parting thoughts on what we can do to support.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it back to the couple level and say that this time is really challenging, but it's also an amazing opportunity to renegotiate your deal. Like, you may not think you have a deal, but all couples have deals around the practical stuff, around power, around career prioritization. And it doesn't take a lot. I saw some of the questions here, like, what do I do if my partner doesn't want to talk? This does not require 3 hours and a burning log fire and lots of wine. It requires 10-15 minutes at the end of the day when the kids are in bed, a good old cup of tea. I know I'm very British saying that, and just some undivided attention without our phones. And I think if we can't give our partners 10-15 minutes of undivided attention, then there's a lot more wrong with our relationship. So make the investment, and I'm sure it will pay off.
Great advice, guys. Thank you so much.
Come to my house and do my hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got you. I'll get the gloves on.
That's what I said. I want you to come over, please, when this is over.
So Eve, Rob, Jen, thank you so much for joining us.